Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Satan in the Suburbs was the true crime hook that set my next guest on the path to writing her award-winning book. Ruth McIver is a Melbourne-based crime writer who grew up in Perth and in the US. Her first novel, Nothing Gold, was runner-up in the inaugural Banjo Prize and was selected to be pitched at the Bloody Scotland Crime Festival in 2014. Her new novel, I Shot the Devil, published by Hachette, won the 2018 Richell Prize, and listeners, I have to tell you, I can see why. Tense and terrifying, this book uses true crime as a framework to explore a dark and explosive story that takes a look at murder and violence along with the legacy of trauma on its victims. A breathtaking, exceptionally clever novel from a talented writer with whom I am excited to have the chance to chat today. Welcome to the podcast, Ruth.
Thank you so much. That's such a generous intro.
Not at all. This was one incredible read. Congratulations on its publication and for winning the 2018 Richell Prize. Publication of this book was a long time coming. How are you feeling about it finally being released into the world?
I know, as you said that, I thought, God, that was a long time ago. You know, it has been a really long journey. And even when initially I got the contract and the first publication date, which was delayed because of 2020 being 2020, I remember thinking, gosh, that's so far away. Like, why isn't it next year kind of things? So it has been a really long time coming, and there's been all these crazy delays. So yeah, the anticipation was huge. And I think it just kind of was one of the biggest weeks of my life, really, but it was all done in such a different format and nothing like how I pictured it, since I was, dreaming of publication. So it's been wonderful on so many levels, but it's also been really hard because it's all been done in this vacuum, and I haven't really been around anyone to share those kind of highs and lows with. So that's been really odd. I'm actually also, in a really peculiar spot because I moved out to the Victorian goldfields a couple of months, like maybe 2 months before publication, just because I needed to get out of the city and the incessant lockdown. So I'm even more kind of remote. So I'm like a little kind of like, I'm like in a cabin in the woods. I'm doing all this stuff and it's really strange. So like it's wonderful, but it's also like everything is done and amplified, I think, a lot more so because I'm sort of quite alone in that experience.
Yeah, such a shame. But, having said that, we can celebrate today. Yay.
I know. And also like the wonderful thing about it, I suppose, is that I've been able to do a lot more on lots of levels because of everything being online. So that's been a kind of really interesting part of it too. And, having the launch online, for example, at first I was really devastated by that, but then I actually really enjoyed it more because I was like, I got to kind of focus on the content rather than the social aspect. Yep. And that was really interesting too. So there's been like benefits, but then there's the sadness of not being able to go into the bookstore and meet readers. But then readers have been contacting me on social media, by email, and I just like telling me what they, how they've experienced the book. And that's been wild for me. Like that's been the nicest part because largely it's been very positive. If it was the other way around, it wouldn't be. No, I mean, it's just like readers actually believing the story and investing in the characters. It's beyond kind of my wildest dreams. It's like, that's the point, but you don't sort of know what that will feel like. And that's really exciting.
Oh, well, I'm so delighted to hear that you're getting that kind of reaction because, as I said,
yeah,
so deservedly so with this wonderful, wonderful story. Ruth, what I neglected to mention in my introduction was the fact that you recently completed a PhD in the field of true crime fiction. And when I read that phrase, it almost seemed like an oxymoron to me, true crime fiction. So can I ask you what inspired your interest in this subject matter?
Well, yeah, so I actually personally prefer to use the term true crime inspired, just simply because I think true crime fiction would be a replication of events. Okay. So, like, for me, it's like I take elements of true crime, but I don't usually use just one case. So, I'll do kind of like a collage so that it catalyzes a sort of series of connections in the reader. So, it creates a sense of like kind of familiarity, but then it obscures the actual crime itself. So that's kind of the reason why I make that distinction, just because I'm not wanting to replicate events or replicate a historical event, just more like what the crime signifies. So yes, so that's kind of like what my PhD was really about, almost that distinction, and also the ethical ramifications of representing true crimes in fiction, because there are no rules. So from what I could see, it was like what the zeitgeist dictated and what people considered tasteful or artful and not exploitative. But yeah, there's no kind of rules besides from copyright law. And so I was like, this is really interesting, and I'd like to kind of see if there is a kind of like answer of like, what's a good way to do this? Is there a good way to do this? And also just exploring my own really uncomfortable feelings around being so interested in true crime, because it doesn't quite gel with me in terms of like, I think there's this one on one side, there is people that are sort of wanting to make money out of and exploit true crime events and are callous with victims of crime. But the majority of people that are interested in true crime are just sort of like really interested in the sleuthing part. They're connected and they're empathetic with victims and families. We're also sort of uneasy and uncomfortable at our level of interest on a level, I think, with something so ghoulish. And I just wanted to sort of explore that.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating to me. Okay, so you've gone on the record to say that this book was inspired by a real case. So can you tell me more about that?
Yes. So it was actually a case that I didn't know about until 2015. And I've been a real true crime junkie for years, like since I was like a teen. You know, it was definitely like a family hobby. My brother and my dad were both really into it. My dad listened to the police scanner and the, you know, card, on talkback radio to putting his 2 cents in. And, you know, he'll ring me up and be like, what do you think of this case? So we're both kind of like these funny armchair detectives. And my brother was always, you know, collected all the serial killer books and stuff. But I only discovered this case in 2015, and it was like purely by accident on YouTube. I'm really interested in sensational cases, you know, cases like Chris Watts, for example, the Chris Watts family murders. Like, why are certain murders so interesting to the public? Why can some people just not get enough of a particular crime? And this crime at the time was like that, but it was maybe lost on me because I was a bit young at the time. So it was 1984. These teens murdered their friend in the woods in this really wealthy area in Long Island. And the key figure, who was like the ringleader, was apparently a Satanist, and he was all over the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. The case was in the New York Times. It was this huge kind of youth panic kind of crime. And when I dug further into it, what really interested me about it was that there was really no kind of substance to the claims of Satanism and occultism. It was just a byproduct of the satanic panic. It was basically kids, rich suburban kids that were kind of quite neglected on maybe a level, in trouble, running wild, and also using psychedelics.
Yeah.
Basically, it was just a fascinating case. And even the images were really interesting because Ricky Casso reminded me so much of pictures that I'd seen of the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. He looked like him. He had an AC/DC T-shirt. His eyes were just wild. And then it was also the likeness to Charles Manson. It was just this really iconic image. So I started writing. I wanted to kind of really loosely base it around these kind of images and to kind of like get the tropes of the crime, but without actually going into the crime. So I don't really represent any of the real events except for the fact that it's a satanic murder in the woods, that there's a charismatic teen leader and that sort of thing. I just want what those associations kind of like catalyze in the reader, rather than to kind of like really look at that true crime itself.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so for those listeners who haven't read I Shot the Devil yet, Can you tell us what it's all about?
Yes, I actually relocated the time because I am a child of the 80s kid, like 90s kid, an exennial that doesn't really exist anymore. I don't think we're the weird in between generation. In 1994, I left America when I was 14. So I decided that I would set it in that year. So it was like sort of me revisiting that time. But yeah, so the book is set in 1994 and 2010, respectively. It's a parallel narrative, and it's about a journalist who goes back to her hometown to uncover this series of satanic murders, or allegedly satanic murders that happened 16 years ago. Basically, she's forced to confront the past, but at the same time is just encountering all these dangers in the present. And she gets involved in something way, way bigger, conspiracy. So many crimes unfold when she gets caught up in this, but she's sort of helpless to stop herself from going further because she sort of needs to face her own trauma in order to, I guess, live her life and to find out the truth of what really happened.
Now, we often talk about the flawed protagonist in crime fiction, the psychologically damaged investigative journalist or the jaded detective.
Yeah.
But I have to say that I thought Erin Sloane kind of topped the charts for me on a damaged character scale. I don't think I've met a character so intent on self-destruction or so, and I don't say this glibly, but almost desensitized to male violence. Can you tell me about your inspiration for Erin and why it was important for you to portray her in this way?
That's such a good question. This was something that really came up a lot in the editorial process too, because I think there was a sense of like, why would this character go into these situations knowing that she's pretty much, facing so much peril? Why is she so self-destructive? And yeah, I think the desensitization is one thing. I think also I wanted to portray someone who had complicated post-traumatic stress and who had been through so much trauma that they didn't have a sense of peril. They'd lost that kind of almost like thermometer for danger, and who had been around so many incidences of bad men that they were sort of unflappable almost in that. So it was really important for me to try and portray that in a way where also that people could actually relate to that character and not be like, well, that's actually unbelievable. But I think that, if we really look at someone who has had complicated post-traumatic stress, who's had multiple incidences of violence, but also someone who abuses substances as part of that and who is in a self-destructive state, they will behave like that. So it was consistent with me, but it was also really difficult because you want to make the reader like the protagonist, of course, because they're taking this journey with them. So I found some people really resonated and really liked her, and other people were like, I found her unlikable, but I still wanted to travel with her. In the same way, characters are just like people that you meet. Sometimes you just won't connect with them and you won't like them. Yeah. Like I got a message from a friend the other day going, she's such a cowboy. I love it. And I mean, that in itself is, these we work with, and writers work with cliches, in the sense of you use them to kind of like try to subvert them a little bit too. Like, the jaded detective or the, heavy drinking journalist or whatnot. But there's got to be something original or unique about that character, I think, that surprises the reader too.
Yeah, she was totally unique. And from my perspective, entirely believable, even though I was saying to myself, I can't believe you're going to do this. But I could understand her motivations and I understood why she felt it was important to do that. So I guess further to that, I want to ask you, Ruth, how did you get inside Erin's head?
Well, I mean, I think it was just tapping into a particular kind of mentality. It's a pretty harrowing write, to be really honest. I based her on experiences that I'd had, but really exaggerated qualities in myself and also friends of mine, so people that I'm close to. It was a kind of very, like on lots of levels, kind of like quite a nihilistic leap, and I'm not a nihilist. So it's difficult, and it was very dark. It was a dark kind of place to go into. Yeah. So I found her writing and accessing her voice quite easy, but it was just also a matter of kind of tempering that with, I don't know, not lightness, but not going too far into a dark place. Yeah. So there was just a balance. And then also, you know, obviously when you're tapping into that, you're going into this zone, and it's a dark place to write from.
I can only imagine that you went to a really dark place in writing some of those scenes because they were very dark.
Yeah, I think the stuff with the children was the hardest for me. Anything, and you know, I am really sensitive to content, and that's why, you know, being a true crime junkie, you're kind of, there's a tension there, because I actually get really distressed by certain content. And for me, the missing children that, you know, appear in the book, and you know, the other scenes, of course, were difficult. But yeah, there were certain plot lines that I found quite harrowing. Yeah, you definitely wanted to go out and kind of play with a baby, or, you know, pat a baby goat after writing all of that.
Ruth, you've spoken about your work in fictionalising true crime as a way of giving voice to victims. There was a hell of a lot of victims in this story, mostly women. And the term, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, gynocide or genocide was something I'd not encountered before. Can you tell me more about that? And what was it about your true crime research that made you want to explore this in the context of this book?
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't heard it either. You know, obviously we're all very aware of the structural violence against women in our society, you know, and just statistically off the cuff, you know, I was just reading something yesterday where, I don't know, I think it was on Twitter, and it was like the leading cause of death in pregnant women is homicide. You know, it's actually terrifying to think that a woman can experience that in any home, in any socioeconomic circumstance, in any race. So, you know, for me, I felt like it was massively important to represent that, and also to represent the real crime. So, for example, like, you know, the way that things are portrayed in the media, you want to have this demon kind of like satanic youth doing all these sort of kind of like crazy things, like sacrificing animals in the woods. But really the violence is taking place behind, you know, suburban closed doors, or say, for example, in schoolrooms, or, you know, by trusted adults. It was really important for me to just sort of expose the banality and the truth of structural violence against women. But gynocide obviously more refers to homicide, basically. So, yeah, in doing that, I sort of was interested in why women are interested in true crime too, and the motives for women writing about and fictionalising true crime, because I think that we want to understand why, but also we need to kind of exercise our own fears and anxieties. Like, do you remember the big wave of domestic violence thrillers that kind of came up the last couple of years? I think it was like Sarah S.J. Watson, I think it was Before I Sleep. And a lot of these thrillers involving, you know, do you know who's sleeping beside you? Could your ideal husband be your killer? And the truth behind that was that there are a lot of women that are really afraid that the person that they're living with might actually harm them. And statistically, that's actually backed up. It's not a nice fact to face. And I think it's hard to come to terms when you have, say, men in your life who are reading that and feel confronted by those statistics or confronted by those realities. But that is the truth of the female experience. And I don't mean that just as a cisgendered woman. Obviously, that refers to anyone who represents as a woman.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Further to that, you've spoken about the Claremont murders as a source of inspiration when you first started writing I Shot the Devil, and the fear that girls at the time carried at being the next victim. Did writing this novel help you work through some of that fear, do you think?
Well, that actually inspired my first unpublished manuscript. So obviously I Shot the Devil was my debut. But yes, I mean, I think that case fed into all of my work, and actually attended the trial. I travel backwards and forwards to Perth just with a personal interest in the case, also writing about attending the trial, but I haven't done anything with that. It's sort of like I've just got these essays that I'm writing, but it was more just a record. I just wanted to be witness to like what happened, and I felt like it was important to me. Yeah, I think it was, obviously that was the crime that was really seminal for me and sort of shaped me growing up. But the thing that really interested me in that was, like, say, the amount of women that called and reported their husbands and brothers and employers, just the suspicion and worry surrounding the men in their lives. That fascinated me. Yeah, I think it's sort of like, we have an outcome and a resolution to that case on some levels, because Sarah Spears still isn't found. And that is, a really devastating situation for her family, and, really something that I just, really pray gets resolved. But yeah, I think that is just one crime that just sort of, to me, encapsulated the vulnerability of being a young woman. And also, like, what interested me growing up in a place like Perth, which is so seemingly perfect and allegedly kind of crime-free, there was a lot of fear and anxiety and rape culture and toxic masculinity and all of those sort of things. So that definitely fed into I Shot the Devil, because all of those tropes are still there. So
Indeed, they are, sadly. This book was set in the US, Massapequa, and I'm not sure if I've said that correctly, on Long Island.
Yeah, in part, and then a fictionalised town.
Why was setting the book in the US important to the story, do you think?
Oh, well, for me, it was my story on a level, because I was travelling back to when I was in the 90s and in America. So there was this element of memoir, and in a sense, kind of like, it was a remembrance of a time and a place. So it was really important to me. And I think also, I'd been writing in this voice before that with this unpublished manuscript. It was really West Australian. And when I started writing in this other voice and tapping into that place, it was like I found my real voice or something. And also I got to kind of experience what it was like to go back in time, and it just came so naturally and it flowed. So that was really important. But also, there are a lot of other crimes on the island that I refer to in the book. So it was really important to setting and place. And obviously that true crime, the Ricky Casso case, did actually occur on the island, although that was Suffolk County, and where I grew up was Nassau County.
As I mentioned in my introduction, you won the Richell Prize in 2018. So tell me about winning that prize and how it impacted your path to publication with this novel.
Yeah, well, it was 2018 was like a pretty gold year for me, because I was, I obviously got selected for Pitch Perfect in Bloody Scotland 2014, and nothing transpired from that. And I was feeling pretty deflated, and I'd gone to do my PhD, and then I started writing I Shot the Devil. And I just started I was submitting the first manuscript at the same time and entering all these other competitions. And so when the Richell actually happened, I was just at the end of my scholarship. I was looking for a job after a 4-year kind of gap from employment, just working entirely on my PhD and writing 2 books at the same time and doing a podcast and being in like 2 bands. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to get this book out there? And then I won this prize, and it's not just the money that allowed me to kind of, continue getting my PhD ready and submitting it and completing. It was actually just the validation for me. And I think, it's really sad in a way as a writer, because you need to find validation anyway. And you need to work even if there's the absence of any praise or any kind of like applause at all. But there comes a point when you just feel like you need a sign that you're on the right path and that that you're doing good.
Yeah.
So for me it was that. And obviously then, it's a pathway to publication. And that's hard, it's hard to get an agent, it's hard to get published these days. You hear that, really frequently, and it is the truth. So it was all of those things. But yeah, definitely it was the validation and support that I got from that, and people sort of saying, hey, we think this is a book of promise. So that was really important for me, because I'd had so many rejections. Just before we started recording, I mentioned, there was times when I just had to actually remind myself of why I was writing, because I'd be sending off and just getting rejected and just feeling so bad about myself and wanting to, at points really wanting to quit. And that was where I was at in 2018. I was like, I'm so sick of this. I'm so tired. I wish I could just give up my dream, because having this dream is just hurting me. And then, all these things kind of happened.
Yeah, it's so funny to hear you say that, and I'm not laughing at you because I totally understand exactly what you're saying. And many writers who listen to this podcast will understand that level of frustration and feeling that you're trying so hard and not getting anywhere. So I totally understand that. But it's so often I have heard that writers being at that point where they don't think they can do it any longer, that they
Yeah,
actually experience that breakthrough moment. So it's so
exactly. I think
interesting.
it seems to happen a lot, and I think it's in a lot of arts because I've known other like musicians who have said the same thing. That's the point they were just ready to give up, and that's when they had their success. And I don't know if it's got to do with the letting go or something, but
Mm.
I was literally at the point where I was like, I'm ready to kind of try a radical therapy, even that would stop me from wanting to have this dream, because I was just like, I'm just not like, I can't believe it. Like, I can't believe that I've had this dream and I've worked so hard for this and I'm just getting nothing. That's why I would encourage anybody to never, ever, ever quit doing what they love. You know, you have to do it without applause, but you also, like, you never know when that applause might come.
No. That's beautiful. That's almost like a quote that I can put up. You have to do it without applause. I love that. Fantastic.
Well, it always reminds me of being a kid, like when you're in the pool and you're like, look at me, I'm diving, someone look at me. And you kind of have to get used to sort of doing something without an audience. And I think what really also, it was funny because while I was writing this book and rewriting the first manuscript, I was performing quite a bit. And it was giving me this rush and a sense of, you know, I could complete things. I could show a product to people. People connected with that product. You know, it was a live thing. And it was like, there was something so satisfying about that. And I think that's another really important thing when you're writing is like, having other projects where you get a sense of satisfaction,
Yeah.
because you generally don't get heaps of satisfaction with long-term projects like novels. And when it happens, it's so far down the track, you're kind of already over it. You're just like, oh yeah, that like whatever.
Oh, yeah, man. I hear you. I totally hear you. Ruth, I understand that you're the co-host of a podcast called First Time Feelings, and that intrigued me enormously. So, can you tell me about that and what inspired you to start the
Oh
podcast?
yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking that about the podcast was happening at the same time too, which was really satisfying. My friend and I have put it on pause for now, just because you'll know, doing a podcast is a lot of work, and I think we were both at the point where I literally don't know how. And I think it's like I think I'm that kind of person that goes like when I'm stressed out and I have a big project, I'm like, better chuck 5 more on there. You know, that's the way that I deal with the with stress. So I was just stockpiling projects. And at the point where I was like, at certain points, I was like, I don't know how I'm doing this. I really don't know. And now I'm kind of the actual opposite and I hate it. But you need to find a balance. But yeah, so my friend kind of approached me. We'd been in a band together when we were like, she's a couple of years younger than me. She was a baby. She was like 17 and I think I was like 22. And we'd been in a punk band together, you know, at that age, and we've been friends for so many years. And she was like, we should do a collaborative thing. I'd really like to do this. And so it was her idea. She is, you know, was the brains behind it. She did so much work. And she's such a marketing whiz too, as well as a really good writer, had a great vision for it. And basically, we just wanted to present these kind of autofictions where, not really fiction, but more like creative nonfiction. Well, we would present a first-time memory, a feeling rather than a memory. The first time we felt rage, the first time we felt happiness, the first time, you know, we felt shy, for example, or whatnot. And then we would write the stories and then just read them to each other and discuss them. And so basically it was like a storytelling podcast, but it was kind of like a radical memoir vehicle too. It was really, really fun. And our plan was to do another season where we actually interviewed other people and got them to write a story. You know, obviously the last 2 years have been really weird and difficult, and multiple projects and multiple bands and things like that. So, but yeah, it is up still. So anyone who wants to listen to it can go to First Time Feelings on the Apple Pod Store or wherever else. And we have a website too. We put our pictures up of each memory too. So yeah, I'm still really proud of that project, and maybe one day we'll get season 2 together. Never call it a day.
Fantastic. Well, I've certainly marked it as something that I would probably like to listen to. Yeah, I think tapping into feelings like that can be really great for creativity.
Well, it's really funny because I'm pretty expository in my first person kind of nonfiction writing. I've written a bunch of personal columns, and some of them when it came out in the big issue, and I remember being at work and like opening up the big issue, and I was like, oh shit, like everyone in this office is gonna know. I went to get gynecological exam, and I've written about it, and I'm writing about having 3 therapists and blah blah blah. So just being really expository. But one episode in particular, and this is very pertinent to I Shot the Devil, being raised super 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 Roman Catholic, and then in the 80s, do you remember those stories about Cabbage Patch dolls?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the possession of Cabbage Patch dolls. So my mum was in America, and she sent me Cabbage Patch dolls. Like no one was getting them, and I had this access because my mum was in the States, and I treated them like babies, and I loved them so much. And then anyway, one time one of them kind of hit me on the head really hard, like when I was kind of like playing with it, and I was convinced it was possessed. So the whole story is about this elaborate exorcism / voodoo ritual that I performed on my Cabbage Patch dolls, and it is so embarrassing. And I had a friend message me and said, I can't believe you did that to your dolls. That was just like wild. And I was like, oh my God, I forgot that people are listening to this. And it is a really, really crazy stuff. I was like, I'm just going to let it all out. And so I really did. I exposed myself a lot in those stories, and they're not all flattering. So
that's very brave though.
Brave or insane, I don't know.
Okay, Ruth, what's next? Are you working on something else at the moment?
Yeah. So I always have a couple in the queue. I've written another full-length novel and a novella. I'm just sort of seeing what's going to happen. So they're just sort of still with my agent. I obviously have another manuscript, which is my first manuscript, which is unpublished. But the way things happened was that I Shot the Devil got published first. So it's very different when you're writing an American novel, an American crime novel, a particular kind of crime novel, and then you've got a procedural West Australian kind of crime novel. So I'm not quite sure what will happen, but I do have quite a few things that I hope to come out. And then obviously the US, I'm working on something to do with that, as in a release there. And, hoping for I Shot the Devil to have some either film or TV come out of it, because that was the way that I pictured it from the outset. Like I was like, I see this as a sort of a either translating to cinema or TV, because I'm obsessed with movies. Like I've been just like I wanted to be a screenwriter when I was young. So writing something that I felt like would be on screen is like one of my biggest dreams, really.
Well, I wish you every luck with that. That's so exciting.
Thank you.
Ruth, if listeners wanted to connect with you or to learn more about you and your work, how can they do that?
Sure, yeah. So I'm not a massive tweeter, but I tweet occasionally. I think it's just Ruth McIver. But I'm on Instagram. I'm better on Instagram, I think. I'm at Roget's Trollop. So that's ROGETSTROLLOPE, which is a nod to Sylvia Plath because she used to call herself Roget's Trollop. I still love synonyms. So... And so that's where I kind of do most of my posting, although I've been scolded heavily by friends who are branding and marketing people, and they're like, stop posting pictures of cats and dogs and weird memes. Like, you've got to make this more professional. And I was like, well, I get it and I agree with you, but I also have to be myself a little bit, because I just can't bear the 24/7 self-promotion thing. It feels really boring to me, to be honest. I'm like, I'm sick of myself.
That's the first time I've ever heard anyone other than me say that.
I just was like, I'm sick to death of you after the first week of promotion. I was like, is anyone else getting tired of this? I'm like, can we talk about something else? But no, I talk a lot about what I'm reading and, what I'm watching, and, make a bunch of land jokes and always have pictures of animals. That's
Oh, you can't go wrong with animals, honestly. Everyone loves a picture about an animal. It's all
no,
good.
and I'm on a farm, like not a farm, but sort of like a property at the moment. And so there are so many animal opportunities. So
Fantastic. Ruth, I wanted to say congratulations once more on the publication of this sensational novel, and I wish you every success with it. Thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
thank you so much. I love talking to you.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.